Everyone, and welcome to another book club episode. And I'm back with my guest, EK Sathue.
Yeah, I have always liked to read. I am obsessed with reading. It's like my favorite thing in the world. So I just absolutely love it. Like I know some authors will be like, "Oh, I don't really like read new fiction while I'm writing." I'm like, I don't remember how words work if I'm not reading any book. It doesn't have to be like something that specifically inspires me, but I'm like, I need to keep refilling
Yeah.
well. Yeah, I started reading when I was super, super young. I was like that kid who like knew how to read before kindergarten. Parents would just like read and I would just follow along. So I have always been obsessed with books. They're just my favorite. I am like that person who will have a 500-page book just like in my purse in case.
Yeah, you're like measuring as you're shopping. You're like, doesn't fit
I
physical
know.
books. When you travel, what is the average amount of books that you bring with you? And don't lie to me. It's okay if you checked a whole suitcase for books.
I would. I usually probably pack on average like 2 to 3 more books than I end up reading. Like I went to Los Angeles kind of right before the holidays, and I think I packed 4 books, and I only read one the whole time because it was also like a little bit longer. But I will panic if I don't have a book. So, and also I am a mood reader, so that is a factor where I will pack like a couple of different vibes.
Yeah.
If I'm like, oh, I might be in the mood for a detective novel, or I might be in the mood for like this literary fiction, I will pack both if I can fit.
Yeah.
But I will probably pack usually like 4 or 5 books for like a 1 week trip, which is
Okay.
when I'm home, I sometimes can read that quickly. It depends on like what I'm reading. But usually on vacation, I do still read, but like there's more going on. So then I don't end up reading all of them, but at least I have
You
them.
read all the time. Now, when you're writing, do you find that you're reading in the genre that you write or kind of, branching out to other genres because you're writing? Like, does it matter?
Yeah, it's definitely like a little bit of kind of an ebb and flow. I think part of it is that I'm kind of never not working on a project because that's like, as we talked about in the last episode, I think that's like the continuity for
Yeah.
me. I'm like kind of always having an idea. So I will, especially early on, like I will just be like, oh, I'm going to read a billion books that kind of deal with this. Actually, I didn't do that with so much with Youth Juice, which is funny. Like I didn't read, there's a bunch of books that kind of came out right around the time or before
Yeah.
that were similarly about like the beauty industry. And I had already been working on Youth Juice for like a while by the time like Rouge by Mona Awad came out.
Yeah.
So those I waited until more recently. Like I did read that and Natural Beauty, which I loved. Like that was more like a treat. Like I was like, I get to read
Yeah.
these as a treat when I'm like done with the one I'm working on because I'd already been working on it for so long and I was like, I don't want to get like insecure. I'm like, oh,
Yeah, I can imagine.
better, or I wish I had thought of that. But a lot of times I will read a ton about kind of the vibe of the book that I'm working on. So like I'm thinking about a project about ballet. So I've read some ballet history. I've also read like a couple of fiction books about ballet to kind of think about. It's almost like more to think about like what am I doing? What are these books doing? How am I gonna take this and do my own thing? But it does kind of give me ideas and makes my brain,
Yeah.
gets my brain going. But I will read basically anything at any time. I'm a huge, mood reader, so I've been very interested in like because I was in LA and I've been there a few times. I have a friend who lives there and I'm very fascinated by Hollywood. So I will read a ton of things about like Los Angeles and Hollywood and, Michael Connelly books. I feel like I'm doing a little bit, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit for some of the later questions, but
Yeah.
I will definitely read whatever my heart desires at the time. And I do like it'll be a mix of kind of research and literally whatever I want, but I
Yeah.
definitely don't hold back. I won't hold back and be like, oh, this is too similar because I kind of want to know. I'm not worried about like it influencing me too much or whatever. So I think sometimes when you read something when you're in the middle of a project and it can unlock something in you and it will
Yeah.
often have nothing to really do with the book itself. It will just kind of open a pathway in your imagination. So
Yeah. I think similarly to like, you know, you've ever like met someone or talked to somebody and you just sit there. My mom says this all the time where she's like, that person's a character. Like they would be a great character in a book. I think similarly, like every piece of life around you inspires you in some way. And so I totally get that. And especially with youth juice, I mean, you were working in the beauty industry, so I'm sure you were just you had all these like other things that influenced it beyond like whatever you would be reading at the time. Now, what are the genres you'd like to read?
I love horror, especially like literary horror, surrealism, that kind of genre. I mean, I love literary fiction, but literary fiction is so broad and I think encompasses a ton of different, like it is a genre kind of, but it's also got a lot of overlap with other genres. Um, I really love detective novels. I love like Michael Connelly novels that are set, there's all like set in LA and they're all about like hard-boiled detectives. I like noir. Those are the ones that I'm like, those I really feel like they're so different from what I write because I just can't, I'm not doing like a police procedural.
Yeah.
And so they impressed me so much, but I also don't feel like that push-pull of like, could I write this? Because I just know it's like so far out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
They're really relaxing to me because a lot of times when I read any other book, I'm like, oh, how did they do this? Like, and I still do it with that like kind of work where especially I get very impressed by, I mean, obviously I don't know how like strictly accurate they are, but I think a lot of those like detective novels where you can tell they're heavily researched about and like the author is really knowledgeable about like the police process is those are really wild to me because I'm like, I can't, how do you like take in that knowledge and then put out a book that's really
Yeah.
believable, but also
Yeah.
telling. And so I will sometimes be like, how did they do that? But I think it feels a little bit more to me like watching just like a really well plotted episode of SVU or whatever, where you're just kind of like, this is really satisfying and that's
Yep.
great. But anything that's kind of like the sad girl, weird lit, weird women, that has always been my genre. And I will read a lot of different things.
Okay.
I'm pretty there. I do have some not hard nose, but like genres that I'm much less inclined to pick up, but I'm pretty open, I guess. And I read
Okay.
a lot of nonfiction too, but it has to be about like things I'm very, very interested in.
I agree. Yeah. What are some of your favorite books?
I have so many. I feel like one of my go-to answers for a more like semi-recent book is Bunny by Mona Awad.
I haven't read it yet, but I hear so many good things.
I absolutely love it. And I think one of the reasons this was kind of, I think, maybe a question you were going to ask, but I think it unlocked for me a lot of the modern horror that we're seeing now. Like that was just, it was another one of those moments that I read this book and I was like, whoa, like it was just so original to me. It also just nails like passive aggressive friendships between women. That was like, it was so perfectly done.
Okay.
And it's just really, really weird. I read it like 3 times, and every time it's just it's like every time you start rereading a favorite book and you're like, how is it gonna be this time? And it's like it's never disappoints. It's always just the first time.
So you're a rereader.
I'm a rereader, yeah. I definitely will reread things periodically. Some things more often than others. Like I think I'm almost feel like I'm studying them a little bit when I reread. Like rereading books, I think for me is really about like figuring out what the author did and how it works so well. Another author that I like reread a lot is Shirley Jackson. So like We Have Always Lived in the Castle is one of my favorite books. It's to me, it's just like a perfect book. It's so short and satisfying and like the narrative fits the character so well, which I think is really impressive, especially I tend to write in first person. So I am always like looking to really great first person narrative. I also really love Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion, which is very different from what I write, I think, but it has this very restrained voice. I mean, I love her in general. She's one of my favorite authors, but she's one of my favorite authors that isn't like, again, doing exactly what I'm trying to do. Every time I read her work, though, I'm like, I wish that I wrote like this. I also love her essay collections, The White Album and Slouching Towards Bethlehem. Also, a less common recommendation, I feel like, is this book called Ill Will by Dan Chaon, which is one of the darkest books I've ever read. I'd been like on an extended, I took it out of the library and then I really wanted to own it, but I decided for whatever reason, I was like, I'm going to find it used and it's just going to like come to me at the right time. And I just found it right before Christmas. So I bought like a copy and I'm probably going to reread it this year. It's kind of it's got like satanic panic vibe.
Love that.
I highly recommend it. It's got some experimental elements that I thought worked really well. And I just thought it was so good. And I also love The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez, which is like short stories. Yeah, I feel like I rattled off a bunch and there's definitely more that I'm missing. But those are some like very influential books for me.
Yeah. What is the next book you're getting ready to read? What are you currently reading? And what was the last really good book you read?
Okay. That's good questions. Okay. I'm going to start with currently reading just because they're very at the top of mind for me right now. But I am reading this giant oral history of Hollywood called Hollywood and Oral History. The authors are Janine Basinger and Sam Wesson. It's like 800 pages, so that I will probably be reading for a while. That's not a lot of times I'll do like a meaty nonfiction and then like some fiction. So the other book I'm reading right now is called Even Cowgirls Get the Blues by Tom Robbins. It's an older book from like the 70s, I believe. And it's my friend and then my husband just both read it and they were like, you have to read it. It's basically about a girl who has really big thumbs. That's like, she just has really big thumbs and hitchhikes. And I'm only like 50 pages in, but it has a very fun voice. So I'm enjoying that.
Okay.
And then the next book I'm getting ready to read, I think I recently bought Mad Woman by Chelsea Beaker.
I want to read that so bad.
I want to read it really badly. Have you read Shot, which is her first novel?
No.
So I love that book and I read it. I read it really early in the pandemic because I think it came out like right as the pandemic was starting. And I remember like I ordered it because all of her events were getting canceled. I was like following her on Instagram and I felt like was so sad and I knew I wanted to read it. So I was like, I'm just going to get it. And it's so good. It's about this like teenage girl who's kind of in this culty religion in the California desert. And she's like kind of trying to find her mom. It's really well written. So I was really excited about her next book.
Okay.
And it just sounds really good. And I recently bought it. So I think that sometimes I think I saw someone mention it in a newsletter I was reading.
Yeah.
I was like, that should maybe be my next book. So I think I'm going to read that next. And it sounds I think it's like a little bit of a mystery and suspense, but also has like a wellness blogger element to it, which I think is, I mean, anytime present.
And I mean, the covers. There are two covers I've seen, and the one that's like blue with her underwater, I love.
Yes.
And I have to give a shout out. I can't believe we didn't even talk about this in the other episode, but Youth Juice, your cover for that is, I mean, that's the first thing that I saw at a store that like made me pick it up. Having never heard of it, was the cover. Like, it was so good.
The cover is absolutely amazing. And like, you know, as an author, you don't really get any like say, but I will say that they have you kind of fill out like a questionnaire. I think most publishers do this, but my publisher, Soho Press, and the imprint is Hell's 100, which is their like horror imprint, which is a new imprint actually, and Youth Juice was like the first new title. They like released it, they re-released it a backlist title called Come Closer by Sarah Gran. And then Youth Juice was kind of the first new one on this imprint. But my publisher, like, I really felt like they listened to my cover opinions, which was very cool. And actually, it's the same cover designer as Nightbitch, so it has like a similar hand.
Yes. Okay, I can see that now.
Yeah, and they did such a good job.
That's also a great cover.
And yeah, and a cover, you know, everyone's like, don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that. Look, if you know a lot about a book and you've heard great reviews, then you don't always have to oh my God, rely on the cover. I was like, what's that word? But if you're walking around a bookstore or a library, cover jumps out at you first.
It absolutely does. And every time I see the cover of Youth Juice, it like makes me happy, which is such a good feeling. Like there's a copy like a few feet away from me actually, and I'm like eyeing it like, oh. I recently read this book called Resentment by Gary Indiana. He recently passed away actually. And Resentment I think was from, so it's basically satirizing like the Menendez brothers who,
oh, interesting.
Yeah, who have been
in the Hollywood crime that I'm sure you've dove into.
Yeah, so I already was interested in reading it, and then they were in the news a ton.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, this feels like the time. And it's just so savagely funny. Like it's so funny, but it's also so dark. Like there's actually a scene in it that made me like very viscerally uncomfortable. And it's just all about like these writers in Los Angeles who are like covering the trial, and then there's like one, you know, there's a couple who are like friends with one of the writers, and it just kind of follows them. And you know, some of them are like gay men with AIDS, so they're kind of you know, grappling with that. But it's all like, but none of it is heavy-handed. It's all just like hilarious and also so dark and weirdly poignant. So I thought that book was absolutely fantastic, and it's been like reissued by a small press, but it's been out for, you know, I don't know exactly when it was published, but it's been out for a long time. Mm-hmm. So I love to discover kind of like, you know, hidden gems, I guess, and books.
Yeah.
I read books from, you know, new releases all the way
to
classics. So I love to read from all different time periods because I feel like you get a lot out of not only reading modern work if you're, you know, if that's something that you're like remotely interested in doing. And I'd love to discover like, you know, those smaller presses and kind of like indie gems. That one was really, really funny and really dark. Even when I was no, I guess I read it over Thanksgiving. So I was like ignoring people and reading that on the cast, saying that this was really great. Thank you so much for having me. And honestly, the perfect way to spend a couple hours on a Saturday.
Oh, I'm glad. And where can everybody find you and get your book?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram at EK Sathue. That's like my main social media. I write a newsletter with my friend Gabrielle Moss. That's on Substack. It's called I Know What You Did Last Thursday. I always forget the title. I'm like,
it's so good.
And then I also, no, that's where you can find me. And then Youth Juice is available literally anywhere that you can buy your books. Get it from your local bookstore, your library, or online. I also really like bookshop.org is a very fun online place to order.
Thrift books. Have you ever used thrift books? I love them.
I've never used thrift books, but I've heard really good things about them.
Well, thank you again for being here. I greatly appreciate it. And again, taking any ounce of your time. And everybody stay tuned for another episode next week. Bye, everyone.